Hi, welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show for this October edition. I'm your host, Neil Geddes-Ward, minus my co-host, Andy Chaplin. Andy's actually out busy. He's actually busy doing his tuned-in events where he does psychic nights at pubs and organises all these fantastic psychic readers. And obviously October is his most busy period. So good luck with that, Andy, and we'll catch you next month. So I'm doing this completely on my Todd, but I'm happy to welcome back a guest that's joined us a few years ago, and that is Steve Ward. Steve is also a host on the Paranormal UK Radio Network of the High Strangeness Factor. So welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show once again, Steve.
It's great to be back, Neil. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. So I know that you, because I've been listening to some of the podcasts, because you joined Mac Maloney on the his channel, and you do the show regularly there. So I've been keeping kind of tabs on people's activities, and I know that you've recently moved house. So it'd be interesting to let listeners know where you've moved to, because it's a very interesting place, isn't it?
Well, I used to live in Michigan, so I'm a displaced Michigander, and I'm living deep in the Ohio Valley in West by God, Virginia. I'm inches from downtown Point Pleasant. Now, Point Pleasant is infamous for the Mothman sightings back in the mid-'60s and all kinds of other strange phenomena that took place there. So I'm actually a stone's throw from the very route that the Scarberries and the Mallets fled the Mothman back in November of '66 when they encountered them at the TNT area north of Point Pleasant. I can step out my side door and look down and see the flood wall that separates me from the mighty Ohio River and the Mason-Dixon line for that matter. And I'm just a few streets away from 6th Street. And that was where the old Silver Bridge used to span across Ohio before it collapsed in December of 1967. So I'm in the heart of Mothman country. I can actually, I'm working weekends at the Mothman Museum, which is extremely well done. It was founded by Jeff Walmsley, who also co-founded the Mothman Festival. I can literally walk to work if I want. So it's really, I never dreamed that I would be, this is sort of like the place, the special place you go on vacation. You know, you'd go to the Mothman Festival, you'd come down periodically to meet friends that you knew through the Mothman connection and the paranormal. And so, now my only dilemma is I don't know where I will go on vacation from now on, since I'm kind of living in my vacation spot.
So what prompted the move? Obviously, it's an interest in the place, but I mean, you must have thought, right, do it or don't. And you must have thought, right, I'm going to do it. So well, was there factors that did that?
I considered a lot of places. I was getting up there in years, a little too old for a house with too many stairs and with the washroom upstairs, you know what I mean? So I thought, the writing's on the wall, and I was thinking about an apartment at first, but I found this little house. It's kind of a homely little house. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the old TV show with James Garner called The Rockford Files.
I remember it.
He was a private detective. And the premise was he lived in this really ugly looking trailer, but inside looked very nice. Now, of course, inside was just a Hollywood set, and the trailer, the exterior was just a prop. But I kind of think of myself as Jim Rockford with a bit of a homely house, but it looks great inside, so that's where I set up.
Wow. Now, I think he lived in the trailer with his dad or something, didn't he? Or
what's that now?
Did he live in the trailer with his dad in the Rockford?
Oh, well, his dad lived, his dad lived in town, I guess. But the guy, Noah Berry Jr., who was a great character actor, and you actually believed he was Jim Rockford's father, So he was in a lot of episodes hanging out.
Yeah, we used to have it, I think, on a Friday night here in the UK on the BBC. And I wasn't a great fan of it, but I used to catch it now and again. Of course, you're a fan of the British TV show, which is something that I've actually been involved in, isn't it? It's the Midsummer Murders show.
Yes, and the amazing thing about Midsummer Murders and its environs is the number of dead bodies. It makes you think that it's safer to be in the U.S. than in Britain, which is probably not the case. But, yes, it was. Started watching it quite a few years ago, I guess in the '90s, and when it hadn't been on for too long. And John Nettles was great as the lead. and he would have various sidekicks over time. And now Neil Dungeon, I think, is the
Yeah.
and they're just very high quality. They have a certain style, and I love the opening music with the theremin, which sets the tone for the episodes.
Yeah, well, I had it all got started actually through my brother, my younger brother, who he got to know an agent, an actor's agent, through just talking to them at the pub, I think. And they said, "Oh, we're always looking for extras." So my brother was recruited in the earlier episodes, I think, with first actor that did it, and my brother was cast as a policeman. And the funny story with that is that they all had to be policemen pulling up into a woods, searching for a dead body or a missing person. I'm not sure. And my brother normally wears glasses, but they said, "Can you not wear your glasses for this?" And
No.
the scene was set that the police van would pull up, and all these cops would jump out and go scurrying through the woods trying to find this dead body. And so my brother jumped out with all the other actors playing cops. And because he couldn't see where he was going, he actually tripped over the dead body. So I think they had to do a retake. And then sometime later, my brother said, "Do you want to do some of it?" So I said, "Oh, okay, I'll give it a go if they want me." So I had to give all my vital statistics, my height. I even had to give my head measurement, would you believe, for any hats that I might be required to wear. But the strange thing is that I've never knew this. I thought that you'd turn up on these sets and they would give you all this stuff to wear. They'd actually ask you, the extra or the background artiste, I think is the posh word for it, to provide the clothes. So if they want someone to be a policeman, you've got to go out and find pretty much a policeman's costume by yourself. The budget doesn't stretch to that. Sometimes they will give you like a fleece or something like that to wear just for added touch. So I took part in the first one. I was told to turn up as something, and I didn't really know about this policy of having to find the clothes. So when I got there, they kind of complained, saying, "Well, where's your costume?" I said, "I didn't know how to wear one. I'm sorry." Now, luckily, they had a costume department there full of racks of clothes. So they fitted me out with something, but they seemed a bit annoyed that I hadn't kind of sorted something out. But no one ever told me. It was my first one. I said, "Sorry, this is my first one." And so I had to play a guy that was working on a fun fair. And I think it's the Wall of Death, where they have a motorcycle going around this Wall of Death. And someone gets murdered in this fun fair, and you could hear the lady scream. But that was great fun watching the guy on the Wall of Death, the motorbike, because we had to be extras, kind of getting all excited. And it was actually quite exciting seeing this guy going around on a motorbike all that time. And then another time I was called back, I had to play the part of a guy walking down the road with a lady, and two women come out of this house and they're having an argument, virtually a street fight. And me as an extra, I have to kind of look across and go, "Oh my God," or something like that. I wasn't allowed to say anything, but you're meant to be mouthing it or something. And then the final one I did was where I had to be an extra on a cricket ground thing, where it was like people playing cricket. And it was such a hot day. And I was just a member of a person supposedly sitting in the cricket ground watching this cricket match. But they had loads of other extras who were actually just dummies just sitting in chairs, hundreds of them. It's quite interesting. So you wouldn't see them from a distance. And so I had to sit there, and I was chatting to this guy next to me all day, and it was just so hot. And I was meant to be doing it the next day, but I was just beat by the sun. And I said, "Oh, I'm not coming back for this." So I just phoned into the agent and said, "Sorry, I can't do it. I'm not well." And apparently my brother, who was also doing it that day, I said to him, did it matter, the fact that I didn't turn up? He goes, "Yes, it did." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "They had to rearrange all their camera angles and shots because I was no longer in the shot, and it would look wrong on the continuity. So they had to rethink everything, all because I took the day off, So I thought, oh, they're not going to employ me again. But in fact, they did ring me up and ask me if I could be an extra. But I wasn't really that interested in that. And I said to my girlfriend, I said, "Look, do you want to do it?" And so she goes, "Well, yeah, okay." So I said, "Look, sorry, love." Yes, sorry, she's shouting, she's listening. She goes, "They did ask both of us, but I kind of didn't want to do it." So I took her up to the town where it was happening. I drove her there, and I explained. I said, "Look, they're going to sit you on this extras bus pretty much all day. They might call you for 1 hour, and the other 9 hours are yours. So I'm going to go out and get you a load of magazines to read." But as it happened, they chose her for every shot of the day. She was in every scene. And it was the episode where it was something to do with someone gets murdered, a wedding planners thing. And it's called Till Death Do Us Part, I think the
Okay.
thing was. She was in the events office and playing a secretary, and they even gave her a speaking part as well. So if you ever watch that series, she's a blonde lady with her hair tied back in a bun, wearing a nice smart thing, working in this office. Sometimes you can see her through the blinds and things like that in the background and stuff. But she really enjoyed it. She thought it was good fun, but it was a long, hard day for her. But anyway, that aside,
But
our
I
TV.
was going to say,
Yeah.
talk about their high production values until I found out they made you buy your own costume.
Oh, yeah, high production values. A funny story before I move on from this was that one of the things that I had to do, they set up like a small pretend cafe in someone's garden, which obviously they got permission from the owner of the house to do this cafe scene, and they made it look like a little nice tea garden cafe place. But the access road that ran through this area actually got to other cottages, and the whole film crew basically took over this whole piece of road. And the next door neighbor, when they started to do the shots, did not take kindly to it. And he came out and he wanted to get his car out, and he was effing and blinding at the crew. And he says, if you don't move, I'm going to ring the police. And so they literally had to mob their set or whatever. And we had to reshoot elsewhere for the day just because this guy was going to threaten to call the cops, you know. But what you don't see behind the scenes, as they say. So it was a bit of an eye opener, but it all came out in the wash, as they say. So it looked all right once it was on TV. But anyway, getting back to your move, how did you end up with a job at the museum, the Mothman Museum?
Well, I've been coming down. My first time to Point Pleasant was actually in 1977 after
Wow.
I'd read John Keel's The Mothman Prophesies. I just wanted to see the area. So I stayed at the Low Hotel in town. I found the TNT area, which is about 9 miles north of Point Pleasant. That's where they used to make munitions during World War II. And it was a huge complex. You can see the old photographs of that. But it's pretty much it's the McClintock Wildlife Area now. In the 60s, when they first saw this thing, it was pretty desolate. Not much was left of what was there. So I came down to, and the old North Power Plant, where the Mothman was seen, one of the original sightings was there. So that was my first time. But my first Mothman Festival was 29 years later in 2006. And I was, I had a grin from ear to ear. I mean, this was just so awesome. You're right there on the edge of the Ohio River. The state of Ohio is across. You're in beautiful West Virginia with the mountains. You got all this history in Point Pleasant, and the Mothman statue and everything. And so I got to meet several people over time. When I was first going to the festivals, I was just happy-go-lucky tourist, buying everything with Mothman stamped on it. But as time went on, I became more and more absorbed. And so I started helping set up in the TNT area for the hayride on Saturday night that we can talk about later. And working a lot behind the scenes and occasionally even speaking at the festival. Jeff Wamsley, who again co-founded the festival, told me if I ever moved down here, he had a job for me. So that's kind of how it worked out. So I'm kind of the information jockey at the Mothman Museum. On weekends, it gets pretty busy. Jeff will call me in other times, occasionally on holidays or whatever. And I basically, the museum is set up where the front part has all the cool stuff like the T-shirts and the books and actually some very high quality Mothman merchandise, DVDs and so forth. The back part costs you a few bucks to get in. That's the museum. And Jeff has done a phenomenal job of collecting all the history and the folklore, including some of the movie props from the film, The Mothman Prophecies. So I usually I'll wander around back there and ask people, is this your first journey to the Mothman Museum? And usually they say yes. And we get people from all over the U.S. We had two gentlemen in from England the other weekend, family in from Puerto Rico, and a young man in from Mexico. So there are people that set this as a destination.
Wow.
You know, some of them just see the sign on the road and stop in. But and I also will wander out to the street next to it, is where the majestic Mothman statue stands, and it was sculpted out of stainless steel by Bob Roach, who's done other historical figures on the other side of the flood wall. But it's a very stylized representation of the Mothman. Doesn't really look too much like it did. Mothman looked nothing like a moth. Let's get that straight. But anyway, it's just a lot of fun. People will go out there and I'll offer to take their picture, because usually you've got a group. One person has to stand back and take a picture of the rest. So they appreciate it when somebody's there to take the entire picture. Now there's a part of the Mothman that people don't know about. How can I state this? Well, if you walk around to the back of the Mothman, his I guess, shall we say, posterior looks very realistic. We don't know who modeled for it. We don't know if who got close enough to give that description. But people, I will tell people after they take their pictures, I'll say, okay, now to get the full Mothman experience, to get the full Monty, so to speak, you have to step around the back of the statue. And I tell them, you're either going to smile or grimace. And usually they smile. And some of them want to get their picture taken next to it. So then what I do is that they have actually up on the building next door is a 24/7 camera feed. So I tell them after they've taken their pictures by Mothman's rear, I tell them, okay, now everybody in the entire world has seen you on the internet stare at Mothman's tuchus. So there you go. But it's just a lot of fun. People have a great time. And sometimes I get in great conversations with people in the museum. But I kind of stand back. I don't, I have a few personal connections with the museum. I donated a magazine that when I was in high school, we had our UFO group, and we published a magazine, kind of an amateur UFO magazine, 6 issues back in 68, 69. And there's a few other personal connections, things I can tell people about if they're interested. So, but I don't force myself on them. I'm not one of those tour guides that you just can't, like an insurance salesman, you just can't get rid of. So
with your kind of skills of knowing all about the background of the Mothman and things like that, you must get asked so many questions. Do they kind of ask pretty much the same questions all the time, or do some stump you?
It's usually about the same. I mean, most people have heard about the Mothman from the film, the Mothman Prophecies, starring Richard Gere, Laura Linney, and Will Patton. That film's almost 20 years old now, which is amazing. But now, see, I was the guy that was following John Keel. I actually saw him on television once, being interviewed on one of the New York talk shows. But I was reading his articles and his books, and I knew the Mothman Prophecy it came out almost 10 years after the events. And man, I was there in the bookstore to buy the hardcover with the dust jacket. That's how old I am. And, it didn't sell well at that time. So I've known about the Mothman for actually, I was in junior high school in November of 1966. And that sighting where the 2 couples were chased from the North Power Plant in the TNT area south on Route 62 right into Point Pleasant, that hit the wire services all over the world. And I thought, how cool is that? A winged humanoid chasing this car down a lonely country road. And that was even before Mothman had a proper name. He got dubbed Mothman later on by some creative copy editor, probably. It was probably inspired by the Batman TV show, which was popular at the time. So just to play on that. But the people that saw it described it as about 6-7 feet tall, vaguely humanoid-like, with maybe a 10-foot wingspan and bright red glowing eyes. So, and then John Keel chronicled about a little over 100 people he talked to that year between November 66, December 67, that had seen it.
So the fact that all these people have seen it, I mean, John Keel and obviously interviewed all these people. Did he come to any firm conclusions to actually what the phenomenon was?
No, he said he didn't really know. Here's the thing: the Mothman, the behavior. While the description was generally the same, one person, Tom Urey, actually saw something more like a thunderbird, and a few other people saw something not quite the same. But generally speaking, people saw that 6 to 7 foot man-like creature, but its behavior was bizarre. it would not always flap its wings. Sometimes it would put its wings behind it and take off straight like a helicopter. The eye shine didn't seem to be eye shine. It seemed to be generated internally.
Mm.
There were Keel got a few reports of people that were in close proximity with it, and they said it sounded almost like something humming, like maybe something mechanical or machinery. And then also there was another. It was Keel, and then there was a Swedish researcher that was actually a colleague of Keel. He had helped Keel out with some of the ghost planes in Sweden in the 30s.
Oh yeah,
It got him information. And Franzen came in about a year or two after Keel, interviewed several of the original witnesses plus more. Both men found out that many of the witnesses afterwards would go home and have an outbreak of poltergeist phenomena. So, what is this thing? Flesh and blood, paraphysical, mechanical, nothing. There was a unnamed town official that went out on his porch and saw this thing on his front lawn, and then went into a trance for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then it took off. Nobody knows what happened during that time. And you know how you hear of eye burn, conjunctivitis when people have a close sighting? Well, Connie Carpenter, she was one of the original witnesses. She was driving by the Mason County Golf Course, which is right near Point Pleasant. Point Pleasant is in Mason County. And she saw this thing standing there, and it took off straight like a helicopter, saw its eyes. The next day, she was experiencing conjunctivitis. Did not see a UFO. She saw the Mothman. Keel wrote that a lot of times people that would see cryptids or some kind of strange animal or had a close proximity with a UFO would suffer from the same physical ailments, muscle aches, thirst, conjunctivitis, and so forth, as if to suggest that the phenomena may have a common origin.
Would that be kind of like some electromagnetic effects on the body or radiation, maybe?
Perhaps, certainly, some kind of a physical effect interacting with the human. Keel was. We talked just a little bit earlier about one of his a book he wrote in 1970 called "Strange Creatures from Time and Space."
This is the one.
And also that has been reprinted as The Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings, and it's in trade paper size. Same book, but it doesn't have the cool Frank Frazetta cover on it like that.
Yeah, it was a good cover. I was trying to pick out all the weird creatures in the cover there. Really interesting, yeah. Anyway, carry on.
He, at first, like so many, he thought that the UFO phenomena was likely extraterrestrial. But as time went on, if you look at the variety of different types of craft people see, even the occupants, the UFOnauts, were very different. And this is again before the Greys came in and kind of took over. The Greys are boring, man. We used to have great UFOnauts in the 60s and 70s. I remember reading the Lorenzens, Carl and Jim Lorenzen, who founded the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, which was a legitimate organization really trying to figure out the mystery. But they would publish books called UFO Occupants, and they had all the classic cases like the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins and the Flatwoods Monster and so forth, and the Cisco Grove encounter. And you had this great variety. Well, Keel was wondering, why is it, while you have general categories that are similar, disc shape, cigar shape, and so forth, when you get down into the specifics, it's almost like there's nothing the same. Once in a while, you'll get an entity or a, in quotes, craft that is very similar, but for the most part, it's not. He came up with the concept of window areas. He was trying to come to grips with why some of these things seem to just sort of pop in and pop out, especially when it comes to cryptids. Even in highly populated areas, sometimes people might see all of a sudden they have a lot of Bigfoot reports, credible people, leaves footprints, and then it's gone. Sometimes the footprints disappear in the middle of a field. And he also, about window areas, he thought that if you go back in history, you'll find other phenomena that occurred in the same area, but we just weren't connecting the dots. One example might be dubbed whales, the Dubbed Enigma by Pugh and Holliday. And others wrote about the bizarre wave of sightings and experiences in 1977 in Southwest Wales. You had 7-foot tall silver suited beings. You had little short guys about 3 feet tall associated with the same egg-shaped craft with curved noses and slanted eyebrows. You had displaced cattle. It was just bizarre. But it had all these things going on. And the Coombs family was was running the Ripperton farm. Prior to that, I mean, they're one of the families that experienced a lot of this stuff. Not exclusively, but many people did. But prior to that, they were living in a trailer, a caravan near the ocean, and they were having some mild poltergeist phenomena. And they would look through their window at 10 p.m. at night and would see an apparition, a vision of the Virgin Mary suspended in the air with her rosary in a white gown. And then at some point, it would morph into an image of Jesus. And this happened night after night. Several hundred people came and they saw it. This, I don't know if there's any connection or not, but it may go along with Keel's idea of a window area being active for strange phenomena. Now, some might think that this is a legitimate religious apparition. Others might say it's some kind of projection. I don't know. But it's just interesting that the same family was experiencing this kind of these religious apparitions. And then later on, they were experiencing what we might call an invasion from outer space. So that was the beginning. But then the book that really messed me up, Neil, I got to tell you, I was a very happy guy with the idea of ET and investigating, taking soil samples, maybe giving us a ride once in a while. This is kind of before the abduction experience got to be that publicized, with no deductible, no copay, no insurance, and no permission. But then I read Operation Trojan Horse, and that was written about the same time as Strange Creatures from Time and Space. And that's where Keel begins to connect the dots with all types of phenomena, cryptids, ufonauts, UFOs, psychic phenomena. And I kind of came kicking and screaming at first, but he kind of made the case, and he talked about that some of these manifestations may be temporal. He called them transmogrifications of energy. And I love that word. Nobody uses that much in normal conversation, right? But he suggested that these things may be, in some cases, a natural condition of the planet, whether it was an intelligence or just something very, very natural and part of our system on Earth. He thought that, in fact, it's very hard to condense Keel into a couple paragraphs, but in some cases, he thought that the strange meandering lights might be the one objectively true part of the phenomena. People would see these things and then be programmed. Some would see maybe a giant black triangle. Some might see a hairy biped across the road. Sometimes people will see a group of people will experience a UFO, but not see it the same way, or some may not see it at all. So he did think that these things became at least temporarily physical because they left footprints and hair samples and landing marks and so forth. But it just seemed that it was very elusive, and it may not they may not actually represent an extraterrestrial or a force at all.
So if Keel was around today, do you think he would still hold that opinion? This
Yes, well, he did. If there's several great collections of his articles from over the years, 60s, 70s, and so forth. And in the one called "The Great Phonograph in the Sky," there's 2 or 3 interviews in there, and he did actually soften his. For a while in the 60s, when he was investigating the Mothman stuff, he kind of rejected the ET idea completely. But later on, he left the door open that it could be another possibility. I think you could say that Keel believed there was more than one answer to these things, which I believe. And he also talked about in Trojan Horse. He used the term ultra-terrestrial, and it was kind of a literary device. He said to differentiate between the idea of extraterrestrial. We don't really know what this force is, but it does seem to have existed alongside us for a very long time. And he said he borrowed the term from Ivan Sanderson. And of course, Ivan Sanderson was a friend and colleague. He was the great British naturalist transplanted to New Jersey, probably best known for the Abominable Snowman legend come to life, and many other great books on UFOs and the unexplained. So he used the term ultra-terrestrial, which has been around for a while now. And the thing is, if you read Keel's books and articles over time, he wasn't static in his thinking. He would look at different ideas. I think he thought that some of this, whatever this force or energy was, some of these things sort of were co-created with us, because if you look out through history, you look at the meandering lights. They used to be exclusively fairy lights, and some people thought they were, in different cultures, thought they were some kind of a witch carrying a lantern on their broom. That's what that light was. And later on, we had the ghost planes, the ghost flyers in Sweden. Sometimes people would just see a light, and sometimes they would see some kind of a massive airplane. There were the Foo Fighters in World War II, the other strange lights chasing planes. So and you had the airships, the 1897 airships, and there were different waves of that. The thing is that so many of these things, including the UFO wave, they were always a little bit ahead of us. I mean, when the airships showed up, dirigibles and zeppelins were really not that viable. And so it's almost like some of this, he talked about paranormal mimicry and the reflective factor. He thought that a lot of this very much reflected human consciousness at the time. And I think we could even talk about Carl Jung and his, he wrote the book Flying Saucers, A Myth of Things Seen in the Sky. And he didn't reject the idea that some of these things may be actually solid craft or solid manifestations. So it's a little bit like this. I call it the Red Queen effect. Remember the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland? The Red Queen told Alice, if you're going to get anywhere, you got to run faster and faster. And poor Alice would run faster and faster, and the trees weren't moving anywhere. That's the way I feel sometimes when we delve into this stuff. The trees are standing still. And, don't you feel like once in a while you get kind of a grasp on part of it, and then you find something else that's, that's not going to work. So why do we punish ourselves, Neil? Why do we do this?
Yeah. It's the never-ending jigsaw puzzle that hasn't got a lid.
It's like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and we have about a half a dozen pieces.
Yeah, and all the other images are slightly faded off the pieces, and we're not sure where to put those anyway. And then when we look again, they've gone. So I did recall reading Operation Trojan Horse that John Keel made a note of when UFO sightings were most likely, and I forget the days. It was like Tuesdays and
Wednesday. You call it the Wednesday phenomenon.
Yeah. Now that's a really interesting thing that no one else had thought of, but he seemed to sort of, he gave ideas why, that there was less people around at a certain point at night, so that they could come in, do whatever they had to do, and was seen by less people or something. Because if they went out on a Saturday night, more and more people would be out on a Saturday night and more likely to see them. And Wednesday seemed to be the quietest night of the week kind of thing.
And I think he was finding, if I recall correctly, that between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., you're more likely to see one, even though there's fewer people out there. There's another researcher. His name is Ahmad Jamaluddin, and I don't know much about him, but he has written articles over the years for Flying Saucer Review. Great British publication. I don't know if it's still going. It started in 1955, and there's a great archive you can get on Kindle. But he wrote a book. It was called 60 Years of... it's something like 60 years of humanoid events. And what he did was he took the database from another great researcher, Albert Rosales. He's the one that has 15 books out called Humanoids, the Others Amongst Us. And it starts with, I think, 01 AD. And then that book spans a lot of area. He talks about all kinds of entities. But then as it gets closer and closer to present day, it covers just a few years. But it's amazing. The database is phenomenal. And so he took that database and he started to crunch the numbers. And he found there were certain months, like I think it was November was one of the peak months. He found that humanoid sightings were more likely to happen during certain parts of the day, and not likely around noon. They must be on their lunch break. I don't know. But something like between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., we were more likely to have a humanoid encounter if you're going to have one. And that held true in every time zone, suggesting that the manifestation or the point of entry is fixed as the world turns.
I was kind of thinking about the world turning and wondered if that had something to do with it. Yeah, carry on.
And then he calls these humanoid migrations. Now, other people need to crunch the numbers in the database, but he said that these are like 8 to 10 year cycles, and if they started somewhere in South America, you'd have an outbreak, and usually in a relatively small area. And then it would move up to North America, could be the US, could be Canada. Then it would move over to Britain, that area, or Europe, the continent, and then maybe Asia or Malaysia. And then it would come back around again and start in South America. And he chronicled there's about this, I don't know, half a dozen of these, 5 or 6 of these over the decades, where about 8 to 10 years that has this same cycle again. And I was wondering if it actually starts in Antarctica, because there used to be, back in the old days when we had, remember Albert Bender, who talked about the Men in Black.
Albert K. Bender, and he vanished for quite a while, didn't he?
And there was another guy named John Stewart out of New Zealand, and others. They would always claim that their research, they were finding that these UFOs were coming from Antarctica, coming from the South Pole, and then the Men in Black would show up because they were finding out stuff they shouldn't. But I just wonder, it could easily be, perhaps there was something to it. Perhaps these things start in Antarctica, but there's not enough people there to report, landing in the snow there, and then they move up through this cycle. But that's, I think that it's just very fascinating. The one thing it does demonstrate, if true, these are not hallucinations. Hallucinations aren't going to go in a pattern like that. So anyway, very interesting. And Keel was the one that really kind of started this kind of research, really, with the Wednesday phenomenon.
Now, you talk about the 8 to 10 year cycle of these things. Now, I've been looking at the idea, you mentioned South America as well. And I've always wondered this to do with spirit manifestations. There seems to be a lot of like psychic healers and psychic surgery and lots of kind of UFO activity down in South America. And we had a guest on the Paranormal Peep Show last year who said that his deceased wife materialized in his bed one night. She'd been gone about 8 years, but he said, although it was dark in the room, he could definitely feel her body. He ran his hands up her leg. He knew it was her body. He recognized it. Put his hand on her stomach and everything like that. He knew it was definitely his wife, and she was there for a few minutes, and then she kind of faded away. And he looked into it and found that night that she manifested in his bed happened to be the night of like a solar flare. And that got me thinking, because I said, oh, it sounds like then she used the power of the solar flare to kind of surf in on that energy in some way, maybe. And so I'm aware of the Van Allen radiation belts that encircle the Earth, which is trapped radiation particles from the sun, and they're caught in our magnetic flux of the Earth's magnetic core. Now, there's something called the South Atlantic anomaly, where the radiation is normally about 600 miles above the Earth to about 25,000 miles out, but there's a part of it that actually dips down, called the South Atlantic anomaly, and the radiation comes down a lot closer to the Earth over the complete area of South America to just above 200 miles above the surface of South America. And so based upon what our guest has said about his wife appearing on the solar storm kind of pattern, there's been like reports of this famous medium, and he's deceased now, Mirabelli. He was able to manifest fully materialized spirits that materialize in the air, not in like a darkened seance room you would get maybe in typical Victorian or even more modern times, where we'd have blacked out kind of curtains and a seance cabinet or whatever, and someone would come out in an infrared light. These spirits would come out of the sky and descend and then walk around and talk to people. There was a case of a deceased girl that had been gone for 3 months, and she materialized, and she was examined by a doctor, and she poked out her tongue, and he took her pulse and everything. 10 minutes later, she floated back up into the air and dissolved. So I was wondering, because of the remarkable properties of these psychic surgeries, the mediums, maybe the UFOs, that the South Atlantic anomaly, i.e. the radiation dipping down there, might have something to do with this phenomena. And because you talked about the cycles of 10 years, I know that sunspot activity gets to a peak every 11 years or something.
Right.
So I'm just trying to work out, could there be connections with the phases of the sun, that energy, and you're talking about the rotation of the earth and that kind of stuff. I don't know. It's just postulation on my part.
There could be all kinds of underlying things. And one area that I'm not well versed in is there are a lot of people that have done research into things like magnetic lines of force, magnetic anomalies, granite, quartz in certain areas. It may well be that there are certain geological features and electromagnetic features that aid or exacerbate some of this phenomena. And it's possible that we just have the tip of the iceberg on this, and that there's so much more. Now, I wonder are these manifestations real, or are they manifestations that are more like thought forms or projections? In other words, if he had experienced what his wife, was that actually his wife, her soul, her essence there, or was it something to do with the memory of her, that perhaps there is some outside stimulus that could have brought it into existence? But I wonder, in some of these things, we talk about tulpas and thought forms and the Slender Man, which is supposed to have somehow come into existence from an internet website. I don't know about that, but and then you have Alexandria David Neal back in 2010 wrote Magic and Mystery in Tibet, and she's the one that is supposed to have created a tulpa.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that story. And then she it kind of turned on her. It got very nasty. He was supposedly a jolly, chubby little llama, the sage, not the animal, and only she could see it. She learned how to create supposedly the tulpa, the thought form from the Tibetans, and then it got to a point where it would sort of start to play pranks on people, and then it got kind of nasty, like a poltergeist. And its features changed, where it looked kind of lean and lost weight and looked kind of evil. So, and then supposedly it took her a long time to actually destroy it with her mind. Okay, look, I don't know if it's true or not, but it is interesting that it went through the stages of friendly, kind of intimate, and then nasty. And I saw a parapsychologist years ago on TV. I don't know who he was, but he talked about automatic writing, and he said, most automatic writing is coming out of your own subconscious. He thought some of it was in fact from elsewhere, but he said, interestingly, it will start out very friendly and intimate and talk to you like it's somebody else, and then it could get very nasty and so forth. But you have to understand it's really coming from you, so don't freak out about it. Well, then I thought back to John Keel. That sounded just like John Keel's silent contactees. In the Mothman Prophecies, that's where the prophecies part comes from. He was in contact with all these people that firmly believed they were in contact with some other intelligence, some sort of space brother or whatever. And in some cases, it seemed like it was strictly channeling. Other cases, they seemed to indicate that they were actually face to face with some entity. But they would have this relationship where they would get prophecies, and they would come true. And it would go on for a while, and then sometimes they would be given a ridiculous quest. Like one woman was supposed to be looking for a crucifix in Brooklyn that she could never find, and one guy, had actual predictions come true. And then the big one, get your buddies together on the hill. The Space Brothers are going to come down and save us. And of course, the Space Brothers don't show up. So you have that same pattern, perhaps, with this, whatever this force is friendly, intimate, and then later on, sucker, So again, that doesn't exist everywhere in the paranormal, but it just seems like it might be a pattern. And something else I just learned, Brent Raines, who has the Alternate Perceptions online magazine, he was reprinting some letters that he corresponded with John Keel. And because Brent Raines said one time he got a letter from somebody that said he was trying to give him information, but every time he started to write it out, he would have an outbreak of a poltergeist in his room. So he wrote this to John Keel, and Keel said that some of his silent contactees, when they were giving him information, would start having these splitting headaches. And thinking, what? And it makes me think of something. I know I'm going all over the place, but Jacques Vallée stated in one of his books that the phenomena seems to negate itself. And that's almost like it's this trickster aspect, where it kind of gets you in the back, and so to speak. Sometimes the experiences are so bizarre that nobody's going to believe it, And you have other situations where supposedly people have seen a UFO. Some stranger shows up on the door, whether he's dressed in black or looks like an Air Force officer, and tells you to be quiet about your sighting, even though you've not reported it. So I wonder if, it does seem like an aspect of this, to summarize this, is that there is an aspect in human consciousness that we have to be aware of and try to deal with. And it's very hard to work through that maze.
Talking of Men in Black, we interviewed a chap at the beginning of the year. I actually met him at the Birmingham UFO group and got chatting to him. So I said, do you want to come on Paranormal Peep Show and tell us about your theories? And he goes, yeah. So he basically was talking about the fact that when he was a younger man, he was walking back to the house. I think he might have been walking the dog, but he said he saw a UFO in the sky, and he thought, wow, there's a UFO, and I think he said his sister saw it as well when he got back to the house. And anyway, that was it. It was gone, and he thought there might be reports in the paper, but there was nothing. It all kind of died down. And anyway, he said 10 years later, he got a knock at the door by this mysterious Men in Black, man and woman Men in Black. And they said, hello, we'd like to talk to you about your UFO experience. And he thought, right. So they said, may we come in? So he goes, yeah. And he was almost like tricked into giving them information rather than sort of feeling that he should challenge them. Who the hell are you? He was somehow acquiescing to their suggestions. So he said they came in, and he'd never reported this UFO to anybody, no clubs, not even to the Air Force or the police, no one. He had not reported it to anyone. He thought, how the hell did they know that I'd seen this UFO 10 years before? And he said they got out a photograph, and they said, was this what you saw? And they showed him a photo of the UFO. But he said the photo looked exactly like it was taken from his own viewpoint, almost through his eye, of the UFO he saw. So it was almost like as if you said he had a tiny camera in his eye and it went click, and they're producing the photo. And he couldn't work out how the hell that happened. And they asked him all these questions, and then they went, and he said, why didn't I ask who the hell they were? They just went, and that was it. It was just a very, very bizarre happening,
Well, that's not unusual, where these individuals come to the door and they don't understand why they didn't question them or let them in. Jenny Randalls talks about she wrote a book on the Men in Black. It has a different title over here, but anyway, it's a great book. And she talks about a young lady, and I I can't remember if she reported her sighting or not, but she saw kind of a classic UFO. Shortly thereafter, a couple men came in, seemingly from the government, and her parents couldn't understand why they didn't question them. They just kind of let them in, and this one started hammering questions at her, and you could tell she was visibly upset. And the questions she listed, some of them, they didn't make a lot of sense. They weren't going to reveal a lot of information. And so Jenny got the idea that, well, why don't we put her under hypnosis to see if we can glean anything else? And when they did, they found that, at least in her mind, you had the one guy asking her verbal questions, and the other one was sending her a telepathic question. So this bombardment was just freaking her out. So again, it's another one of these sort of nonsensical things you can't even begin to explain. I talked to a lady that had an experience with good men in black. I don't know, maybe they were angels dressed like men in black. This was back. Well, I was at a Michigan MUFON meeting, and the lady, a sweet little lady, said we were talking about this and that, and she said, "Would you like to hear my Man in Black experience?" And when somebody asks you if you want to hear their Men in Black experience, you say yes. So back in the 60s, she and her husband had just been married. They were out in Las Vegas, not much money, so they're hitchhiking. They're picked up by this big black car. I asked her if it was a black Cadillac. She didn't know. There were two men in front, dressed in black suits and fedoras. And I asked her if they looked a little odd, like some of the Men in Black are supposed to. She said, no, they look normal. She offered a feature that was very interesting. She said the dashboard was weird. It had all kinds of lights and dials on it. Well, there's maybe there's one in one of Keel's book and another one I've read where people talk about the same thing, that they have been in supposedly a Man in Black car. And that's something most people don't know about. And she offered it, without any kind of, So anyway, it could be that she planned this and thought she found a live one, but I don't know. Anyway, so they took them along their way. They got out. They said they were ready to get out. And one of them turned to her and said, we think you should wait a little longer. And so they both fell asleep. And then they wake up later and they don't know how long they slept. And they thank the men, and not thinking at the time how bizarre all this was. They walk to a small motel. They walk in. The proprietor looks at them and says, "My God, it's a good thing you guys didn't get here earlier." And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" It turned out that another couple had robbed a store nearby. They didn't look identical to them, but they were dressed similarly and from out of town. They could have easily been mistaken for this other couple. So the fact that they were delayed saved them a lot of grief and perhaps even jail time. So, wow. So we've all heard stories of angelic intervention where an individual or group of people are in dire straits. A mysterious stranger shows up, helps them out of their difficulty, and then they're gone. But evil, rotten, sneaky Men in Black, UFO silencers doing a good deed, maybe they're trying to atone for all the witnesses they've terrorized. I don't know.
Now, it's interesting that they talk about the dashboard on the car being a bit high tech. I mean, it's almost as if the car is trying to fit in with our technology, but it's, like you say, just slightly ahead in the kind of computerized department, especially for the 60s. Now, I've heard of UFOs masquerading as planes and things and Spitfires from World War II. Have you heard any of that kind of stuff?
Yes, Keel talked a lot about, even planes that didn't make any noise and would do strange maneuvers. And sometimes I think he chronicled something where in Mothman Prophecies, where they would go out to a particular hill south of Point Pleasant in Gallipolis Ferry, because the TNT area got so crowded with people. Everybody went out there with their shotguns and bow and arrows because they were going to bag the Mothman, right? So Keel and his entourage would go way down into the hollers in the middle of nowhere, and they would see all the strange lights come over. And I can imagine it can be pretty lonely and desolate down there now in some of those areas. Imagine what it was like a half a century ago. But one night they saw it was a plane. It was noisy. It kind of went into a cloud, and it came out as a strange light. So, and I know a person that saw something like that in the TNT area a few years ago. So, um, boy, it's just hard to know. If you can't trust your senses, what can you do? But you know what? The important thing is that we really need to listen to people and their experiences. I mean, it's so easy to go in with a preconceived idea, as I had back in the ET days. Man, I didn't want to hear anything that John Keel was writing in Trojan Horse at that time. But so it's just it's like paradox upon paradox.
Whoever said the paranormal had to be normal.
That's
It's
right.
the para extraordinary normal. I mean, it's like I've been reading recently about these Wollaton gnomes. Do you know about the case of the gnomes in the park?
I know of it a little bit. Is that the guys that drove around with little cars
That's
with
right.
the
Yeah, I've
children?
been reading. It
Yes.
happened in Wollaton Park, which I understand that the manor house, Wollaton Manor House, was used in one of the more recent Batman films as Bruce Wayne's
Oh,
house or
okay.
something. Don't know which one it was. But on the edge of the park in 1979, I think it was 5 or 6 kids, about 8 years old, were playing in the park about 8 p.m. at night. They saw this movement in the trees, and out came these little gnomes in these little cars, for want of a better description, except the headlamps were more triangular. They didn't have a proper steering wheel. It was more like a handle they turned, but they kind of leaned left and right to kind of steer it. And this thing kind of floated over logs. And there seemed to be about 30 of these vehicles chasing the kids, a gnome in each vehicle. And it was chasing them. Now, it sounds crazy, but the headmaster interviewed all these kids separately, and all their stories kind of pretty much tallied, which suggested that they had indeed seen something. And I was reading other reports from people in that same area from like 50 years before, or 70 years before, had seen small men that she described as very small policemen standing in the doorway of the lodge to this area, like a little lodge for the gardener or something like that, of Wollaton Park. And they seemed to be laughing and smiling, but she thought they were like little policemen about 3 foot high in the same area. And another occasion, another lady reported, again, walking through that park area, that there seemed to be gnomes that were following her, and they were showing her things around the park, and again, being very friendly and jovial. And it all sounds a bit crazy. You're thinking, well, what's going on there? But then there's another case of a lady in 1940 who lived in Cornwall, and she heard a strange buzzing noise outside her bedroom window at night, and she looked down into her garden and described what she thought looked like a gnome going around her garden in a small little car, round and round in her garden, until eventually it just vanished in the darkness. So I don't know what's all this about gnomes, but whether they're real beings or they're masquerading or something, and it's a John Keel thing, I don't know.
Well, we have all kinds of different UFOnauts, and then we all have all kinds of different elementals, gnomes, fairies, leprechauns, and so forth. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was fascinated by the subject, his book The World of Fairies, he talks about how the elementals, the fairies, sometimes their appearance, it depends on the individual looking at them. So perhaps this was the context of what the children saw. And it sounded like John Keel 100 years earlier, you know. And also, if you look at some of the reports, say 50s, 60s, 70s, of the UFOnauts, if you were to change their silver suit with a little green tunic and a little red cap, in some cases, they would look very similar to that. And of course, Jacques Vallée and others in Passport to Magonia demonstrated that there are many, many elements of folklore that mirror some modern day UFO experiences, like missing time factor is something that occurs with the little people as well as the abduction experience. And who was it? Not Elliot O'Donnell. Can't think of his name. Wrote Welsh folklore. It talked about how wayfarers along the road at night would be very afraid of a mist, because sometimes the fairies would grab you and take you up into the air and then deposit you somewhere else. What does that sound like? It sounds like an old time abduction, you know. But yes, there's quite a lot of information about even I mentioned David Wales. people that were in close proximity with the some of these silver-suited beings developed a kind of a dermatological condition with their skin. Well, there was a tradition back, something called elf disease or elf burn, which was also some kind of a dermatological condition if you had some kind of encounter with the elves. Now, there's no way to determine that it's the same thing or not, but interesting nonetheless that in both encounters, they had this kind of skin problem. And you even have, in Dovid, you had displaced cattle. The Coombs family, they locked up their 100 cattle in the pen. They've got the deadbolt there and the strap on it so it wouldn't be moved accidentally by the cattle. The next morning, they're gone. Everything's locked up, but the cattle are gone. Where are they? A half mile away at the Broadmoor farm. Now, the thing is, if somebody thought, okay, we're going to pull a prank, this is a pretty heavy duty prank. You know, we lead the cows out. We got to go by the house where they're sleeping. And then we have to lead them over to the other farm because it's a 90-degree angle. And usually cows don't really, think that way. Like, let's make a left or a right, So a few days later, Billy Coombs takes 16 cows out, puts them in a pen, turns around, goes into turn on the milk machines, comes back, and they're gone. Where are they? The Broadmoor farm.
Wow.
So they and then you have the displaced Angus bulls in the Skinwalker Ranch. There were these 5 or 6 bulls that were in a pen, ended up somehow in this white trailer in a stupor, unharmed, but so Pugh and Holiday, they would look at a lot of possible connections with folklore, and they weren't dogmatic about it, but they did find a tradition in Norway where the milkmaid put her cow in a pen, and then she went to retrieve her milk bucket, and the cow is gone. Everything's locked up. Eventually, one of the little people come to her and says, "You can't put your cow there. It's spoiling our food." So they went off on the speculation train, wondering, well, perhaps the elementals derive their food from earth energies, and the proximity of these beasts, interfere somehow. But when the bulls disappeared from the pen at the Skinwalker Ranch, Terry Sherman's wife, Gwen, they were driving back and they were in the midst of all this craziness, strange objects in the sky, disembodied voices, cattle mutilations. She said, "I pray nothing ever happens to those bulls." And when they got back, they couldn't find the bulls. There was no footprints or whatever, and they found them in that trailer. And
but they were unharmed.
Unharmed. Let me give you one other one that'll be a little closer to home. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Carry on.
Alan Godfrey, right? Todmorden, England. He was a constable. He was called out one night because they found these cows in a gated community. They don't know how they got in. It's all locked up. And so he thinks it's a joke. He goes out and talks to the lady that reported it. And she said, "I might be old, but I'm not crazy." And sure enough, he and his partner found these cows where they shouldn't have been. She also had seen some kind of strange light. On the way back to the police station, he sees a classic UFO, draws it on his pad, and then he goes back. Later on, he realizes he's missing about a half hour. A few months later, he undergoes regressive hypnosis, and he has kind of a classic experience. The one entity, as in so many cases, is taller than the rest. He calls himself Yosef. He is in these white robes, but he's surrounded by these little guys that Alan can't even look at because they're so ugly. Sound like a really ugly looking gray to me. I'm not sure what they were. But then at one point, he's under hypnosis and he's describing what's going on. Jenny Randall's reported this originally, and he says, "There's a bloody dog in here, and it's hideous." A large black dog is in this spacecraft, and it's kind of shades of the black shuck, that haunts the moors and the castle ruins in England. So again, these things seem to meander. All those things had something to do with displaced cattle, displaced livestock. What the heck? At least I'm not talking about some of the horrible mutilations that occurred. That I really don't understand.
Yeah, that's where things get really physical. And I know that it was Linda Moulton Howe that kind of first brought that to our attention back in the mid-70s with a Strange Harvest film. But yeah, I mean, there's even been cases of human mutilations. I don't know if you know anything about that as well. Yeah.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah, I saw a video the other day on YouTube of this UFO. Whether it was fake or not, I don't know, but it seemed to be flying and it seemed to be dropping an object out of its belly and it fell to the ground. Now, the guy who had come across this video wasn't the guy that filmed it. And he said, well, if that was me, I would have walked over to where that had dropped the object and taken a look. But the guy who originally filmed it didn't seem to be so inquisitive. Now, it could have been fake. The speed this thing fell out looked to me like something that was small, like you'd drop, say, a ball, except this was supposedly, I don't know, a 40 feet UFO in size. So the object kind of fell quite quickly, suggesting that it could have been a model. I'll send you the link at some point, see what you make of it. But yeah, I mean, I was trying to work out, was it a cow or something? You couldn't really work out what the shape was. It seemed to be circular with bits sticking out of it. So I really wasn't sure. You know, someone said it was rubbish or something. They're throwing out their rubbish. But I mean, I've never heard of that. But you'd think they'd be finding UFO rubbish bags everywhere or something. You know, it just seemed a very, very strange thing. Anyway, we're coming to the close now because this is going to be a short Paranormal Peep Show because we're minus our guest. So I was going to ask you, obviously, you're now working at the museum. Is there any other events coming up that you're going to be taking part in, Steve?
No, I just I spoke at the Mothman Festival and I attended the Van Meter Visitor Festival, which is in Van Meter, Iowa, is just west of Des Moines and deals with another winged cryptid from 1903. Great little festival. We had a great turnout. So I've got nothing. We're kind of getting into the season where not much goes on, but of course I'm a little further south these days, so maybe I won't be battling the Michigan winters to have another conference. So nothing specific coming up right now. I hope to restart the High Strangeness Factor on the Paranormal UK Radio Network with Andy Mercer. And what else? Allegedly, I've been writing a book, which will be out sometime this decade, I imagine. But I hope nobody holds their breath on that one. So I'm getting my library organized, and do you know how when you go through your books sometimes and you think, oh, I've got to read that one again, or I haven't read that one yet. That it's like they're all jumping at you because there's so much. Every time you sit down and start to read, you find more stuff. And my thing is that we need to listen to the witnesses. Of course, we're going to try to qualify them, but there these patterns, these parallels seem to show up, you know, if once we document these things. And let me just I guess in kind of closing, I'd like to paraphrase. You know, we lost Timothy Green Beckley, Mr. UFO, not too long ago, and I used to love his publications. They were kind of seamless, almost like the old Saucerian Gray Barker publications. You know, it was kind of seamless, that transition. Well, he said in an interview one time, essentially, that whatever this is, this phenomena, however it is constructed, however it manifests, it doesn't matter what we believe. It doesn't matter about all our learned papers or our endless tomes of the paranormal. It acts independently from all of that. So, you know, that's what we really have to deal with, is really trying to be objective as possible and get as much information as possible and as confusing as it can be. And that Red Queen effect, you know, it's always going to be there. But it's, you know, as you know, neither one of us could stop doing this. I mean, you know, I don't know what it is, but it's something inside that makes you want to continue.
Yeah, you feel that you're going to get somewhere, but you never do. It's a bottomless pit, really. It's like trying to explain dreams, and you know, dreams don't make any sense sometimes. And so I gave up on trying to interpret my own dreams years ago. Now, if people want to reach out to you, how can they find you?
Facebook, Steve Ward. I would think if you type in Point Pleasant, you'll find the right Steve Ward. I should mention that I'm also a correspondent on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files, where you and I were on together recently. It's a crazy show, a lot of fun. You never know what's going to happen. And Yes, I don't have a website, but also on usually afternoons, if you're in Point Pleasant, stop by on Saturday or Sunday, and I'll escort you around to the back of the Mothman statue for a few laughs. I'll help you take your pictures. I'll answer any questions you have, and I can direct people to where the bridge memorial is. And there's a lot of things to see right in town, just walking around, that are very, very cool.
Excellent. That sounds like a place well worth putting on a visit list. Well, thank you very much indeed, Steve. Or should I say Switchblade, Steve? Because that's
Yes.
how they call you on Mac Maloney, don't they? Everyone seems to have a nickname.
That's another story. But,
Switchy or something.
Yes, right.
Well, I didn't ask you what you've had for breakfast, but I'll leave that for Mac Maloney to ask, because they always ask you what you've had for breakfast as well.
I think he might have that segment copyrighted. I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. I won't tread on his toes on that one. But anyway, so listen out for Steve on the Mac Maloney's Military X-Files, which comes out on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I believe it's weekly, that show.
Yes.
Very, very good, interesting show, interesting guests. And listen out for yourself. Coming out soon with the high strangeness factor.
Right. There's a backlog of about 2.5 years that sometimes Andy is my co-host, and sometimes we have other people on. And it's been great because we had quite a variety of guests on the show.
Excellent. That's something to look out for, and wish you well with that then. All right. Well, thank you very much indeed once again for joining us, Steve. And we wish you well for your future research. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the Paranormal Peep Show.
Thank you for having me. It was a great time.
Okay, and we'll see you next month on the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Good night.